Welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast. JPP with David M. Cohen, rabbi, lawyer, fundraiser, therapist, and author. Money makes the world go round. It makes different people do different things. In this podcast, we explore views of money and how money is used to impact lives around the world. Each week, we'll engage with another interesting personality in the fascinating and diverse world of Jewish philanthropy. Let's begin now.
Why come to Car Sharks? Why not? Our core beliefs and our foundation is built on customer service. No does not exist in our vocabulary. Think Amazon for cars, except we'll go to the Gaza Strip and back in a yarmulke for you. Service doesn't end when you get your car. Every single customer has my personal cell phone number. So if you're looking for a car, if you want to get out of your car, carsharksauto.com or 516-399-1500.
I'd like to welcome to the show this morning my very close chaver, my good friend, Rabbi Joshua Hess, who's also a quasi-relative, not 100% related, but we do share brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law in the sense that his brother is married to my sister-in-law. So we have that connection, and his parents were lovely hosts when we spent the summer in Israel this past summer. We benefited greatly from their largesse and staying in their lovely, beautiful home. But Rabbi Hess is somebody who I've been very close friends with for a long time, and somebody I have a great deal of respect for, and somebody I think we all can learn a great deal from. So it's a great honor and privilege to have you, Rabbi Hess, this morning on the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast. And we're going to frame the discussion. We're going to, of course, explore your background and let the audience learn more about you. But then we'll probably frame our discussion in the context of the rabbi, the job or the role of the pulpit rabbi in Jewish philanthropy, in fundraising for his kehillah, for his community, as well as potentially at times I'm sure people solicit the rabbi from the rabbi's charity fund, or there are times when the rabbi is asked by organizations to help outside organizations vis-a-vis his balabatim, his constituents. So the pulpit rabbi certainly touches intimately on the world of Jewish philanthropy. So that's going to be the nature of what we're going to be discussing here. So good morning, Rabbi Hess. Great to have you here.
Good morning, Rabbi Cohen. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to spend some time with you this morning.
Okay, thank you so much. So I know that you're, from the West Coast, from California, but our audience may or may not know that. So tell us a little bit just about where you grew up, kind of some of the schools you went to, and just some of the exposures and early influences in your life.
Yeah, grew up in Los Angeles on the West LA area. I would say it was the typical modern Orthodox upbringing that I was exposed to. Went to Yavne Hebrew Academy that our good friend Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn is now the dean of, but he was a student then, and when I was there, a few years older than me, and went to ULA for high school, then went to yeshiva for a couple of years in Israel, went to YU for a year, and then I went to Ner Yisrael for about 5 years after that. But typical LA upbringing. Weather was great. The materialism was phenomenal there. But it was overall it was a great upbringing, and was very pleased to have so many friends, which I still keep in touch with from my classmates for the last 30 years. We're still in touch. So
that's you raise an interesting point. Which is that, whether it's true or not true, and I have occasion to visit, the West Coast and Los Angeles in particular, often in my work. I've probably been there, every year for the last decade, 1 or 2 times. It's a great place to visit. Thankfully, it's seemingly we call it the gashmias, or the physicality, or there's a lot of emphasis, I guess, on the West Coast in particular, on kind of call it maybe externals, or maybe there's a certain largesse or affluence there. I'm curious kind of, what did you see in terms of, if people who grow up in modern Orthodox Los Angeles communities, Pico Robertson, etc., they're exposed to a lot of affluence. I don't think that's a secret. So I guess the question is, how did you see that being channeled in your youth? Did you get messages about altruism, about philanthropy? Did you see people that were using that wealth towards support of the community, or was it only channeled, towards self-aggrandizement? I assume not. I assume it probably, was channeled into the community.
Yeah, it was both. I would say that the culture is not lost on you when you're living there. When perhaps on the East Coast, where there's plenty of affluence as well, they don't have Hollywood. It's New York, it's New York City, but it's somewhat siloed. In California, Los Angeles specifically, the Hollywood feel permeates all around you, and then you have the occasion to bump into celebrities on and off, and as a result, I think it just creates the mentality where you want to be, perhaps more so, you want to emulate them, materialistically speaking, more so than in any other place. So there is that allure and that desire to not keep up with the Jones, but be somewhat of a celebrity, get in that mindset. Certainly as a teenager, you're kind of stuck in that mentality, which is hard to get away from, because it's all around you wherever you go. And of course, the weather is so great. Everyone is out all the time. In New York in the winter, sometimes you want to just hang out at home and not go anywhere. In LA, everyone is around. Everything is accessible, and there's something in the air about the materialism. But I would say with that materialism, families in general, in my experience, use their material, their affluence to help support various Jewish institutions, shuls, schools, JCCs, Eruv organizations, so that it's certainly channeled in an appropriate way much of the time. And from personally, I mean, I grew up in a family where my parents were able to support other shuls and institutions. My father was also the president of the OU on the West Coast for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there was a lot of volunteering of time and money. And I think for me personally, I can say that the values that were instilled in me were to always channel your material wealth first and foremost to your community, and then at the same time you are allowed to enjoy some of the success
Sure.
that you've amassed over your professional career.
Sure. It reminds me of I have to reaffirm what you're saying, because I know the Hess family personally, and you are very fortunate to have been raised by incredible role models, incredible people. And that of course, I'm sure influences and impacts kind of the work that you do with the community. I was going to just say that I remember hearing a story many years ago. I don't remember which philanthropist it was about, and it would be silly even to suggest it was this one or that one. But there was a certain philanthropist. I'm sure there are many philanthropists who were exceptionally well endowed, and they had the practice of, like, if they were making an exorbitant wedding or a very special simcha in their family, and they were spending X amount of dollars, the first thing they would do would be like write the same amount of money, the same check for charity, for people that were in need in Israel, etc. And like the same day their child was getting married, like they took care of like so many families that needed refrigerators or things like that in Yerushalayim. So it's a beautiful concept in the sense that, Judaism certainly believes, we don't believe in being, ascetics, and we definitely believe that we can integrate. That's the Festival of Purim that's around the corner, talks very much about integration of physical as well as spiritual. And it's a famous idea, rabbis know, kind of Yom Kippur and Purim, Yom Kippurim, that there's kind of, they're two sides of the same coin, and that Yom Kippur is like Purim in the sense that our ideal, in contrast to maybe other religions or other, is that we really do believe in integration. And I think that's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful model, the Los Angeles community, that on the one hand, they benefit from some people, obviously not everybody, it's silly to stereotype, but some people who have been blessed benefit and are enabled to enjoy that life and to be outdoors and to have swimming pools or whatever they may have out there. But at the same time, they don't forget about those in need and taking care of others, which is a very, very important lesson in philanthropy. I'll just one more point quickly. I remember I had my former community on the Upper West Side. I had an individual, a member who came from an incredibly altruistic, philanthropic family. I remember one Shabbos I spoke about the idea of giving. Those who are privileged, those who have what to give, have greater responsibility. I remember how much it resonated with him. Like, he liked that formulation, like the idea that if Hashem blesses you with certain gifts, that doesn't make you better than anybody else. If anything, it gives you greater, bigger shoulders or greater achrayut or greater responsibility. And that's what I heard you saying, in the sense that if you have it, so then you have a responsibility to do good with that which you have.
For sure.
Okay, cool, wonderful. So you spent, I guess, after high school, like the traditional modern Orthodox trajectory at that, at the time when we were growing up, I guess, was going to Israel for the year. Is that's something I imagine you did?
Yeah, I was there for 2 years. I went to Or Yerushalayim, went to OJ, and then I went to YU for a year, because that's where everyone went to after you finish yeshiva. Go to the traditional modern Orthodox trajectory, and after that, I was struggling perhaps to maintain my religious commitment. As a young kid, I was not mature enough to handle the allure and the excitement of being in the city, since I really never lived there. And it was affecting my studies both on the general side and on the religious side. So I needed to make a change. And thankfully, I went to Ner Yisrael. I was a little more remote area, kind of sequestered a little, and I was able to focus and grow in the manner that I did and become the person I am today.
Did you know, at what stage in your life did you know that you wanted to become like a Jewish communal leader or become a rabbi? Was that when you were your 2 years in Israel? Was that in your brief time at YU? Didn't sound like it was. Did that only happen when you got to Ner Yisrael? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, I think it was in Ner Yisrael. I mean, you could say that I always had a chush for it, or feel for it, because I was exposed to it all the time. Although I was exposed to it from the volunteer side, from the lay leadership. I was always exposed to those values and whatnot. So I understood the responsibility of what it always meant to be a leader. And perhaps as a youngster, you could see that in me. That's hindsight is 20/20. I don't know at the time, but yeah, I think when I was in Baltimore, that was when I said to myself, look, my desire in life is to help people, to develop relationships, and to inspire people to do good. How the best place to do it for me is in my Jewish community. So that's the direction that I took.
So how did you, your first, if I remember correctly, your first position in the pulpit was in Denver, Colorado, which I guess is not that far from Los Angeles, California, where you grew up. Not that close, but not that far. It's certainly on that side of the country, on the west side of the country, the beginning of the west side of the country. How did that evolve? What was the trajectory in terms of completing smicha in Ner Yisrael and transitioning, from there to your first rabbinical position?
It's actually fairly challenging for me. Coming out of Ner Yisrael, it's not always so easy to get a pulpit position. You're up against guys that are your same age who have smicha from YU, plus they have a master's degree. I only had smicha, which I guess you could say that Ner Yisrael smicha might be regarded a little more cachet than YU, simply because it's more unique. But I didn't have the secular background to match, but thankfully the community overlooked it, saw the potential, and I had a great 3 years in Denver. It was a tremendous learning experience for me. Made a lot of mistakes, not on the fundraising aspect. I wasn't doing fundraising in Denver at the time. A little bit, nothing major, but just learning what it means to be a rabbi and to navigate the political seen, and to learn more about yourself as a person. When you're out in the rabbinate, you're not necessarily in tune with yourself, who you are as a person. And when people start to get sometimes a little critical of you, you start to immediately get defensive and try to understand how people could possibly be angry at me or disappointed. But then you learn about yourself and you grow and you become a better person for it. So you go through your lumps initially, and once you have that experience, then you're good to go for the future.
Right. I mean, every one of us kind of, who has had a career in the rabbinate, you have to start somewhere. It's like in any profession, you kind of have to do, stage or shimush or some sort of, you kind of start at the bottom. You kind of just hope to get some sort of position. For you, it was in Denver. For me, it was in Fairlawn, New Jersey. Kind of like you try to latch on to somebody older, more experienced, the community where you can get some exposure. And for sure, it's a tremendous learning opportunity and growth opportunity. I'm curious I'm sure on a very minor level, because you were the assistant rabbi and you were just getting started, but what kind of even minor fundraising were you doing even at that early stage of your career?
Most of the fundraising was for programming, for bringing out the speakers, scholars, and residents, trying to have programming strictly for the shul, and then sometimes fundraising to do larger communal programs, joint programs with other organizations. So it took a little more coordination, pooling resources together. But that was part of the fun. There was already discussion at the time that the shul in Denver still hasn't built their shul. They've been in their school building lunchroom.
I visited the community, so I know it's a school/shul. Yeah.
Yeah, but they've been in the lunchroom, or they call it the multi-purpose room, for the last 15 years or so. I think they're just starting to possibly build a building. At the time when I was there, I already had initial talks about getting things going, because no one wanted to fundraise for it, and I was ready to go. I was excited. I'm a young kid. Let's get out there and start fundraising. But nothing really materialized, and I was only there for 3 years. So now, 10 years later, they're finally getting ready.
You never know. Like I live now in North Woodmere, and there's a lovely, amazing, kahila here, led by the great Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, really, really impressive Torah scholar.
He was my counselor in Canvas Torah.
He was your camper, really? That's hysterical. So his shul is called,
he was the counselor. I was the camper.
Oh, you were the camper. Okay. Beit Knesset in North Woodmere, and there they have a frame, like they're building a building right now, and I think that shul's been in existence over 15 years. So you never know. Like everything is the right time and the right opportunity. And I guess I'm fortunate to arrive in town where I'll finally see this come to fruition, a brand new building. It's very exciting whenever there's an opportunity for, I think, I've spoken to other guests, capital campaigns, and we'll talk a little bit more about this soon. And it's not exactly a capital campaign, but you built a mikvah, which is an incredible thing. And when people have a project that they can really sink their teeth into, and that's something that they can touch and they can feel and they will see for posterity, that's something that I think really galvanizes support much more than I always found as a rabbi, you're talking about the programmatic piece and fundraising for programs. So, one-off, you'll be fortunate somebody not fortunate in that sense, but as a fundraiser, you're fortunate that, they have a yard site, there's a special occasion, they want to name something, they want to sponsor something. But there was always kind of the friction of like, why are we raising this money? Like, why isn't this part of the regular budget? And I'm sure there's some shuls that it's just part of the regular budget with membership dues and whatever other fundraising they do, big adol generally, and then they take funds from there and they support their program, their programming, as opposed to other communities where it's kind of like a separate from the regular budget. And then you run into issues of like, why we give money to the shul already? Why is it separate? Like, I don't know if you ever, if you run into that tension either, kind of in Denver or in your current shul in Linden, New Jersey. It's kind of, it's two different boats in fundraising. There's like kind of the big boat, which is like a mikvah, a building, things like that. And then there's kind of like these smaller things that people either get excited about or don't get excited about, kind of depending on, who your audience is.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. But at the same time, when you're dealing with the shuls and specifically the board directors of the shul, So they may say, oh, this should be part of the dues assessment, and then have more control over how the program is implemented. But then at the same time, then they say, well, why should it come from the dues? We don't want to pay for it. So then you go fundraise for it, and now you have control over the program because you fundraised for it. And then they get upset. Well, what do you mean? Well, why do you have control over it? Well, I mean,
we want more input. I remember that. Yeah, I remember that when I was on the West Side. I had that often where I would. The shul budget was pretty limited and it was pretty specific, but of course you want to keep up with the other dynamic shuls in the community. You want to do programming, and you start raising money for programming. But at a certain point, people often resent when the rabbi has too much shlita, or too much absolute control over a program. Why is the rabbi picking every speaker? So you have to be smart about it. You have to get committees, you have to get people's input, while also kind of reserving the right to kind of veto certain speakers. It can be delicate. It's true.
Yeah, I tell people that there's, perhaps the committee structure, which we have in our shul, is the way to go. But the problem with the committee structure is that if you want to implement a new program, so let's say it falls under the jurisdiction of the ritual committee. Well, then the ritual committee will create a subcommittee of the ritual committee who will discuss it and then come up with an idea. Then they have to go to the ritual committee to make sure that the ritual committee is on board. Then they're going to have to then propose that to the board of directors. Right. Maybe before the board, there's an executive board discussion. The president has to be on board from beginning to the end of the process. So by the time you're done, you get so exhausted. And it's so frustrating. Some people think that, oh, well, if I just do it on my own and I carry all the weight and I raise all the money and I just put the program in by myself, that's going to tire me out. So the truth is, the other structure may be even more tiring. At least this way, you get in, you get the program, you put it together, and you move forward. Here it's a lot more hand-holding. But either way, the more people you can involve in a process, the truth is, the better that it is. But you just have to hope that they don't burn out.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, moving on in your career, so you left the Denver community after 3 years, and how did you end up in Linden, New Jersey, where you are now? How did you end up transitioning from position A to position B? You were looking around for opportunities. This was the opportunity that you went for. How did it kind of evolve?
Yeah, there are a few opportunities available. I think what we were looking for, my wife and I, was to be closer to be on the East Coast. Was our priority, close to my in-laws. Big shout out to my mother and father-in-law. Or also,
I hope they listen. I hope they'll listen to the show. We have to make sure they listen.
Yeah, who are always around, always involved in community work and Balei Tzedakah as well. So have certainly great influences both on my side and on my wife's side.
I know your in-laws as well, so I know that's also true.
Yeah. So we wanted to be closer to them, closer to some family. The truth is we had family in Denver. So my wife always said, wherever we go, we should always be near family. I said, fine. So we found Linden. Linden was a growing community, a small and growing community, and had afforded the opportunity for a young rabbi to come in and develop it and grow a community based on your values and your desires and your vision. And that appealed to me as how old was I? 27, 28, maybe 29. So I said, yeah, you know what? Let me take the opportunity and see where it goes. I'm a young guy. Why not try this out and have the opportunity to do something special? It's one thing to go into an established community where everything is essentially set. Your job is to just sustain it,
maintenance, right?
Right. Here, it's not maintenance. It's transformative. It's community building. It's infrastructure building. So that was, to me, that was much more exciting.
Cool. That's tremendous. And how long have you been in your position now?
Almost 10 years.
Wow, a decade. Holy cow. And you still look so young. Baruch Hashem. Amazing. But wow.
My beard is just as gray as yours.
Not as gray as mine. But 10 years, wow. So 10 years, one can really sink their teeth. I remember one of my rabbinic mentors telling me that it takes about a good 5 years for any rabbi really to kind of sink his teeth into a community, know the landscape, know all the players, kind of really establish himself. So I think that's probably accurate, give or take. So doubling 5 years, 10 years, one can, I think, really, probably do some really great things. And just from watching you from afar, I've admired kind of through the advent and the beauty of social media, I've been able to admire and see the growth and the young people coming to your community under your tutelage, under your auspices, the expansion of seeming like almost there was a time where it almost seemed like every other week there were new eateries that were getting hechsherim in the area under your auspices. So I'd love for you to share a little bit with the audience, just kind of like what's happening in Linden. What had happened, what was the evolution, what's happening today, and why is it so attractive for young families to move there?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for the accolades. Mix us shifcho.
That's the deal. Anyone who's willing to come out to my show, I try to treat them as nicely as possible.
Okay.
No, but it's really true. I'm very impressed. So please, I'd love for you to share kind of what you've done.
Well, when I first came to the community, there were probably about 10 young families or so. The community had some talented leaders, but the leaders wouldn't stay that long, in a few years and then out. So like you said, it was hard to establish anything concrete. They had for many years rabbis who were here for 20 some odd years, perhaps most notably Rabbi Stephen Dworkin.
Right. I remember, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Rabbi Dworkin, Zichrono Livracha, I remember coming to visit him in his home when he was still the Rav in Linden. That was the first time I was ever in Linden. So yeah, you certainly had illustrious predecessors.
Yeah. But after Rabbi Dworkin, some of the leaders came in and out, didn't establish their roots here, so it was hard to grow the community. And also the community was a traditional community in the sense that it was an Orthodox shul, not a lot of Orthodox in practice, just Orthodox in their, let's call it dogma, but at least in their attendance in shul. They only davened in an Orthodox shul. So the challenge was how to build a community where young from families would be interested in being a part of it. The idea of trying to keep the same families in the community was not really sustainable, because all the families whose parents grew up here who weren't Shomer Shabbos and the like, they were already moving to different communities in Union County, in Essex County, in New Jersey. They weren't planning to come back. So and they wanted to be Orthodox. The younger families, the kids who might have been involved in NCSY here in the 60s or 70s, they were not interested in Orthodoxy at all, unfortunately. So it was a matter of getting from families into your community and growing it as a from community. So that was a challenge. So I came there at about 10 families. Now there are closer to 40. It's still, wow. I mean, it's a nice jump. Obviously, there's still a lot more work to do, but thank God we're moving in the right direction. I still, even though I've been here 10 years, I still very much view this as an entrepreneurship. So I like to call it entrepreneurial rabbinics. It's a lot of fun. It's never boring. There's always something creative that you can do. Like I said before, when you're in a larger, more established shul, you have protocols, you have structure, and you can't really deviate. You can only work within that framework. I don't have those problems. My options to be creative are unlimited. So I can try one route. If it doesn't work, I can pivot and do something different. It's just, there's a lot of flexibility. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying it.
No, I can 100% relate to that. It's interesting. Some people, their rabbinical trajectories take them to more established shuls, and some people get to go to more entrepreneurial shuls. And, for me, I began my tenure in the rabbinate in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. 5 years in Fair Lawn as an assistant rabbi. We're actually going to be partaking in celebration of Rabbi Anshe Chesed's 50 years in that community and their upcoming retirement and transition to emeritus status. So I started my career kind of in a more typical traditional type structure shul, and I grew up in one in Young Israel West Hempstead. And then my next two career stops, both in the Young Israel of the West Side as well as in Congregation or Torah in North Woodmere, both were shuls that had very rich histories. But at the times when I arrived in them, they really, turned into entrepreneurial opportunities because there wasn't really infrastructure in place and a deep history at those moments in time when I arrived. So I can definitely relate to the excitement to those of us who have a creative bent and those of us who like to kind of, roll up our sleeves and kind of really get involved in all different facets of building community. So it is an exciting, great opportunity. I want to pivot our conversation a bit to building the mikvah, because I've seen and heard, one of the major, capital contributions that you have made to your shul, both in terms of raising funds, in terms of building, is the beautiful mikvah that now exists or is almost completed, or you'll tell me exactly where it is in the process, or it is completed already for a number of years, in Linden, New Jersey. Kind of how did you come up with this idea? Hey, we need to build a mikvah, and then how did just nuts to bolts? How did you begin to do that?
Okay, yeah. So the mikvah was built about almost 4 years ago.
Okay.
So it was done pretty early in my tenure. One of the I actually just spoke about it this past Shabbos. One of the line items in my first contract was to oversee or continue the efforts to build a mikvah in Linden.
Uh-huh.
When I got here, the efforts were pretty much non-existent. Everyone was soured on the prospects of ever building a mikvah here. There was a yeshiva that rented space in our building that was giving us some challenges with building a mikvah on our own property.
Okay.
That's for another time. And everyone said, you know what, it's never going to happen, and just give it up and let's move on and just try to grow a community without building a mikvah. But I think most people understood, and clearly I also believed, that it's hard to build a frum community without having all the frum amenities that are necessary in any community. So it's true that we are essentially a suburb of Elizabeth, the area. So you have restaurants there are mikvahs there, but at the same time, you want to have your own infrastructure in order to grow your own community. So we needed it. Certainly for Shabbos and Yantif, we didn't have a mikvah. And you need a mikvah in order to grow any frum community.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, just because I didn't even think of this as we're talking. So I came to North Woodmere a year and a half ago, and the first thing I walked into, it wasn't a line item in my contract, but one of the first things I walked into was like discussion about a mikvah. Now, I live in the 5 towns. I mean, the community's booming. They just built a beautiful state-of-the-art brand new mikvah, in the Cedarhurst, Lawrence area. Millions of dollars were poured into that. And they're talking about building a mikvah here. And in fact, it's going to, Bez Hashem, if it comes to fruition, it's going to be in my shul, in Congregation or Torah, the future site of the mikvah of North Woodmere. But then it dawned upon me exactly what you're saying. You can live in the most vibrant Jewish community, and you can live on the outskirts of a very vibrant community like Elizabeth, and there may be all the amenities available, and you can hop in your car, and it's a 10-minute ride. But there's two aspects to it. One is the practical, like you said, like the Shabbos, the Yom Tov. Like, there's a lot of talk here about the Friday night mikvah, that in the cold of winter, the women shouldn't have to walk 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes to get to a mikvah. But maybe even more profoundly than that is just the reality that to be a shtat, to be a kehila, to be a place, to be on the map as a frum community in the United States of America, 2019, 2020, is you need to have your own infrastructure. You need to have your own mikveh. Maybe it's not going to be as fancy as the one on Central Avenue, but it needs to be. So you saw that as a visionary for your community, and you kind of I guess took the bull by the horns. And what were the next steps? What did you do? How did you begin to make that happen?
Right. So even before that, we had to identify a location for the mikvah. So initially, when we tried to, before my time, or even in the beginning of my time, the yeshiva that was renting space in our building was hesitant for us to build a mikvah on our own property. So we had to look for an alternative location. But I rejected that out of hand. And I said to my leadership, we cannot build a mikvah not on the shul property. It has to be on the shul property. Because as you can often see, and this is another strategic idea, is that when you build a infrastructure, communities grow around the infrastructure. Well, if you have a mikvah half a mile away, then why does any family, when they move into the community, need to live a block away from the shul? They'll start a new shul a half a mile away. I said, no, if you're building a mikvah and you have the space and it can be done in a tenure manner, then keep control of the infrastructure so that if anyone ever wants to utilize your space, it's on your property. The community grows around your area. Fascinating. We haven't had this discussion, I don't believe. But when I built the mikveh, or in the process of building the mikveh, at my posek for the mikveh, Rabbi Yirmiyahu Katz in Borough Park, he said to me, he said, Rabbi Hess, I promise you, when you build a mikveh, your community will double within a couple of years. I said, okay. I said, I hope so. It'll be great. To this, he was right. My community has doubled. What's interesting is that we actually have had a Hasidic community move into our area.
Wow.
So we have already a whole nother Hasidic community starting. That Hasidic community, which so far has been a nice asset in our area, the community would not have moved here without the mikveh. The infrastructure was here, so now they're here. But just imagine if the mikveh was not on my shul property, all the other challenges that we have had to deal with. Now the mikveh is on our shul, on our property, and it's easier to maintain the necessary control and influence over it.
Fascinating. So they use your mikveh. The Hasidim use your mikveh.
They use my mikveh. They use my Eruv. They don't use my kashrus because my kashrus is not Chalav Yisrael or Pas Yisrael. But so far, yes, all the infrastructure they utilize. So
certainly. Right. Certainly at the early stages of the community that, as you're talking, this is kind of a tangential point. I was just thinking about, it is interesting. Many, many communities, and certainly I guess shuls that were built many years ago, the mikveh is in the shul. Now, a lot of the logic that you're positing in terms of being kind of the communal point and infrastructure being built around the center of the community and not creating disparate points in the community point to that. Although it is interesting, you kind of alluded to it, like, we know that the mikveh in general, we're very sensitive that it should be in a as you said, like a tzniistic fashion, that it should be modest, that it should be quiet, that we kind of, the intimacy that transpires between husband and wife is something that we keep, that's something private. It's not something that and on the one hand, you have a shul that's very active and you have people coming for prayer services. And then I remember being in Fairlawn, when I was in Fairlawn, the mikvah's in the shul, and they always had to coordinate, the men should leave shul and they shouldn't see the women coming. So it's kind of interesting in the sense that on the one hand, we do seem to build mikvahs and shuls. On the other hand, it's a little bit counterintuitive because it's probably the place where there's the most traffic in the community. So it is interesting in the sense that they have that. I don't know why that happened. It is interesting. I mean, I know why it happened. I mean, practically, it probably makes the most sense. I'm just thinking about North Woodmere, Or Torah, our shul has the most space, and to have to go get a location to build a mikvah is going to add a tremendous cost, variable on top of whatever it costs to build the mikvah itself. So why not just take the free space? I think oftentimes it's kind of almost like a logistical point. Often it's almost like, besides kind of, you had a strategic point. I think I'm just guessing. I'm just throwing it out there. It's not really the topic of our conversation, but we'll leave it quickly. But I'm just throwing it out there that I guess many mikvahs are built in shuls probably because of space and money considerations more than any strategic or even tzniistic consideration, because it seems to run counter to that on some level. Yeah,
I think it's usually for practical purposes. Right. For us, again, as an entrepreneurial rabbi in shul, I guess
it's a new term, the entrepreneurial rabbi. I like that.
Yeah, you're kind of thinking about, okay, well, we're looking to grow the community, and I'm looking to grow my shul. There currently isn't any other shul around, but in 15, 20, 30 years, there may be other shuls around. Hopefully there are other shuls around. That's what you're trying to do. I always said that I'll know that I was successful when another shul opens up. That's how you measure success. So if I'm assuming all these things that are going to happen in the future, well, how do I ensure that my shul, where I'm currently employed, will be able to continue to enjoy long-term benefits of the infrastructure? So that was my cheshbon.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the nitty-gritty of building this mikvah. So
yeah,
you had to establish a budget, presumably, and how did you go about, what was that budget, and how did you go about raising out those funds?
Okay, so the first thing we did was, or I did was as follows. Again, once we finally figured out, identified the location, identified the space, we needed to look for a builder. I knew there were a couple builders in our shul who've been involved in different projects to real estate and whatnot. There was
every shul always has guys who it's funny. Yeah. It's like every shul has that, yeah.
So there was one family that came to shul once a year on Yom Kippur. Very sweet family. I developed a relationship with them just from once a year. I went to the house a few times just to schmooze and hang out. And the father was cultivating his son to be part of the business together. And then the father was getting ill, had cancer, unfortunately, and then he passed away. But at the time, he was still alive. I was talking with his son about the Mikvah project, and he didn't necessarily know much about Mikvah, but when we spoke about it, he got excited about possibly getting involved. And when his father passed, I asked if he would continue to be interested in involved in the project, and he was happy to do so. And what we agreed was that he wouldn't charge for any of his GC work. We would name the mikvah in honor of his father. So I think that initially saved us a couple $100,000 right off the bat. Any GC would have to. The GCs have to live too. They need to eat.
Right.
So that was a tremendous help for us. And our mikvah is called the Ziga Rishansky mikvah in memory of Ziga. And Mark, who built the mikvah, is still now we're very close friends. We have a great relationship. Mark built the mikvah for us, and that was huge. So
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. It kind of raises in my field where I do full-time fundraising. So, there's two types of gifts. There's obviously tangible money gifts, and then we call in-kind gifts, which is an interesting category of gift. And there's always a lot of, like in professional fundraising operations, there's often, there's discussion about credit and who gets credit, and there's fundraising goals. It's like a sales team has to, you have to accomplish a certain amount. And it's interesting because in certain organizations, they don't count in-kind gifts at all towards fundraising goals. I remember there was a point in my career where I was helping try to obtain a horse of all things. Yachad, we work with special needs kids, and apparently horses are beneficial for therapeutic purposes. I think we might have located a horse from a different address. This is like an ongoing saga for a number of years of getting a horse for our kids in the school.
I may have a contact for you.
So a few people have contacts, but it was interesting because the initial conversation I had with a donor, it fell through in the end because it wasn't the right horse, but they wanted to give us like a thoroughbred that's value was like $50,000. So I was like, hey, this is exciting. I get like a $50,000, fundraising credit. And then I found out that it counts for zero because in the organization I was working for, in-kind gifts didn't count. Now, I didn't understand. I didn't really understand the theory of like why in-kind gift. I guess, you could play around with these, people do this probably with tax purposes as well. Like, the value of these things is hard to put a value on. Like you alluded to that, like kind of like, but it's clear, like, you would have had to hire a GC. It would have cost you a couple $100,000. Like there's no question whether you put the number at 180 or 360, like he added tremendous value to the Mikvah project, right?
Well, there's two parts to that. Number one, first of all, to your point of tangible gifts or in-kind gifts. Again, we're a startup shul, either an entrepreneurial rabbi or a startup shul. So we're still in that startup mode. So for us, it's really about amassing any sorts of income is a big boon for us. It's a tremendous help. So that's never, we're not in, again, there aren't any established systems where, okay, well, you got this gift, it doesn't mean anything.
Don't get me wrong. The organization's more than happy to take the in-kind gifts. They just don't want to give credit to their fundraisers for getting that. It's two different things.
Yeah. The other piece is that we were able to determine what GC costs would be, because we actually had 3 or 4 proposals that we received from other companies, other builders, just to get an idea of what the costs we were dealing with and how each one saw it. So once we kind of had an idea what all these different companies were quoting us, then we knew the value that we would be receiving for his commitment to the project.
And how much was left after that to be raised?
Left after that, the goal was to raise an additional $500,000. So I think that the full project was around $750,000. But once the GC part was removed, which was a tremendous savings, we were left with about $500,000 to raise.
Okay, so how did you go about raising $500,000? And how much time did it take?
Well, let's see. From the time we put a shovel, we put the shovel in the ground in 2013, and the mikvah was open in 2015. All the money was raised. So I would say it probably took us from 2000 and maybe a year and a half. I don't know, something like that.
Okay.
Basically, the way that it started, again, having the Shul politics, so this is the rabbi piece, where we have in our community, either you're generally over 75-year-old family, or you were at the time, 35 and below. The middle age wasn't there, and none of the middle age group, none of the families over 75 ever use a mikvah, let alone have heard of the term mikvah. They only first heard the name mikvah when young families started moving in. So they're thinking, we've lived here for 90 years. We didn't need a mikvah. Why do we need to build a mikvah? So you have a lot of educating to do. But more importantly, they're the ones with more disposable income.
Right.
And they're not necessarily prepared to give for a mikvah unless they see that the younger families who really think this is so important will show some form of commitment, even though they know that they can't produce. They can't donate at the same amount as the older families, but they at least want to see some form of commitment. So what we did was we went to all the young families at the time who were currently living in the community, and we said, we want everyone to give a gift over 5 years. Some 10,000 over 5 years, some 5,000 over 5 years, some 1,000 over 5 years. I said everyone has to give, because we need to go to the older families and say, look, we have raised X amount. We have commitments of X amount of money over 5 years. You can see that they're in it, they want it, and they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Right.
Now, can you help support us? So that was good. So I think we started out with about $180,000 in initial commitments from the young families.
Wow.
Which was really great. Yeah, it was really helpful. And that maybe it's 120. I forget now. But it certainly got us going.
It was a six-figure commitment from the younger families, and it's kind of it's beautiful, and it's counterintuitive as well, because often in fundraising campaigns we start off with the major gifts, and then we kind of build around those. Here, strategically, because of the nature and the dynamics of your community, you actually went for the smaller gifts, but you did so many brilliant things, because you engaged the younger community, which then you were able to leverage that to engage the older community. And on top of it, psychologically, there's a rule in fundraising, which I was taught by one of my mentors, which is that if you're giving $10,000 over 10 years, you're a $10,000 giver, even though you're really only giving $1,000 a year. You think of yourself as a $10,000 giver. You'll say, hey, I'm giving $10,000 to the mikvah. Nobody asks, well, how long does it take you to... This was new to me. Like, when people make major pledges, $1 million pledges, I was kind of like, wow. Like, and then I realized, not take away, it's just like people give a $3 million gift and they give $300,000 a year over 10 years, which is incredible. I wish I had, that type of donor. But at the same time, it's not, it doesn't say anywhere you have to give all the money at once, assuming you can move forward with the project or take a loan or whatever it is. So that's great. That's a great way to get people engaged, to give money over time.
Yeah, so that's how we initially started. And once we did that, I was able to then go to some of the more established families and then ask again, not asking for tremendous amounts. Our community isn't as affluent as other communities. So I would go to certain families in the community and ask for, 20,000 over 4 or 5 years. And I was able to do that a number of times with some of the families here in the community, the older families in the community. Mm-hmm. So that really helped us get, I would say, a little over halfway to the finish line, which was great. At that point, some of the other pieces we had in play were as follows. And number one, we wanted to look for organizations who would be willing to help out with the building of a mikvah. So there's an organization, Mikvah USA.
Right.
At one point was interested in helping us out, and then they weren't interested in helping us out, and then they did help us out in the end. But it was one of those things where you have to play the long game and just be patient with organizations, especially just because they tell you they change their mind doesn't mean they're away forever. As long as you keep the door open, you keep the communication, eventually things will come around. So, we didn't get as much. Initially, Mikvah USA said, "Oh, we're going to give you over $100,000 to build your mikvah," which was really exciting. I can use that. That's a great get. Ultimately, it was closer to $40,000, but it was helpful nonetheless. So that was important.
That's incredible. I wasn't aware that. I don't know much about mikvahs yet in terms of building one. I assume I will learn more in the coming weeks and months. But I actually just assumed Mikvah USA was kind of an organization that gave a lot of know-how. I didn't realize they actually gave funding. And that's incredible.
Yeah, they fund. So that was, it was very helpful. The other piece, and this was part of the tension, was that I will have a relationship with a lot of the non-Orthodox rabbis in the area.
Right.
And by the way, just the general key in fundraising is cultivation. So you have to have relationships with people. If you don't have relationships with people, then you can't just walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can I have some money?" You have to know them. So I've had a warm relationship with the non-Orthodox rabbis in the community since I've been here. And one of the challenges that they felt is the challenge of utilizing a mikvah for their conversions. They have converts who they want to convert, and where do they go to use a mikvah? Do you have any idea?
No. Where?
I'll tell you where they go, because people don't know this. They go to Teaneck. Okay. If people in Teaneck, I always say this: if people in Teaneck knew that their shul, that their mikvah is being used for non-Orthodox conversion, they might not be so happy about that. But anyhow, so they go to Teaneck, and it's a big schlep for them. Why do I have to schlep all the way to Teaneck if I can get something here? So I said, guys, look, I'm planning to build this mikvah, and I would love for your support. And they were very enthusiastic about it. Initially, Mikvah USA said, if you're going to take money from non-Orthodox rabbis and synagogues, we're pulling our funding. So that's kind of what happened, and whatever. But I felt that it was the right thing to do, so I continued my relationship with the non-Orthodox rabbis, and they were able to help and get some contributions for me. Nothing major, but something. And the shuls are members of our mikvah, so they pay an annual contribution to the mikvah. But the biggest piece was that we got another, I think, $20,000 from the federation, because when the federation heard that we were a community mikvah, they were very excited about it and motivated. And as a result, they wanted to support it. So that was the other piece. And then the final piece was the fact that in Linden, we're blessed to have a lot of frum businesses in the area. A lot of actually Hasidic-owned businesses who live in Borough Park, and instead of owning a place in Borough Park, they will buy a place in Linden and set up shop here. They're going against traffic, so it's easy both ways. So, and it's so much cheaper to buy a place here than to have anything in Borough Park. So there are a lot of families, a lot of businesses here, and I have a relationship with them because they have mincha minyanim. They're like 10 or 12 mincha minyanim all around the area. So because of that relationship, I said, look, we're building a community mikvah. I need your help. and I would get between anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 for the project, and that was a tremendous help as well. So when you put all together, we were able to get all the money, and Baruch Hashem, the mikvah has been in use for 4 years. Our usage has gone up. We've done some outreach. People who've never used the mikvah have come to our mikvah, and we have from the people who are not religious at all to now Hasidic families using our mikvah. So it's been a great blessing.
Kol hakavod to you, really. That you deserve all the credit in the world for doing that. Let me ask you one question. What was the largest gift that you solicited? Largest individual gift that you solicited for this campaign?
I don't think it was that large. I think it was. I mean, we relied on a lot of smaller donations. I think maybe about $50,000 was the largest donation. We did have some. The sisterhood of our shul was also had money that they've raised over the years, and they also we got them excited about the project, and they donated also a significant amount. But we relied heavily on smaller donations to meet our goal.
No, which is a model. I was somebody on one of my previous podcasts, Rabbi Mark Wilds was telling me how Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, who recently passed away, and he was really a master fundraiser, how his average gift was like $72, and he was like the most accomplished fundraiser in the Jewish world today. So you can do it in a lot of different ways. I was just curious in terms of when you were asking for, whatever the most substantial gift you were asking for, were you nervous? Like, did you have training in fundraising? How did you do it? That's really what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I didn't have much training. My wife's grandfather was a master fundraiser. He was in Denver for many years. He was also a shul rabbi, Rabbi Stanley Wagner. He was tremendous. So we used to speak to him a lot about strategies. And he always told me that you need the 3 C's in fundraising. One was cultivation, developing relationships. You can't ask for money unless you have a relationship.
Right.
One was communication, always being in touch with your board of directors, your people, making sure that they're always, they know where you are, where you're holding, and where you're going. Right. And clarity, that in order for you to fundraise, you have to have a mission, you have to have a purpose. You have to understand and be excited about what you're doing. So you kind of need those 3 C's. You have those 3 C's, you'll be successful. But that being said, I never really had a chance to fundraise while he was still alive. So this was all happening after he passed. I didn't have much training other than just go in there and ask. But the ask is so much easier when you have a relationship.
Right.
I'm not knocking on somebody's door, cold calling and asking them for $10,000 to the mikvah. So I have a relationship with them, and when they can feel my excitement for the mikvah and how important I feel it,
right,
they feed off that energy plus the relationship, and they're connected to the community. So putting all that together, it's easier. So yeah, I was rejected sometimes, and it was frustrating at first, but it's part of the process. So you just, as long as you're not afraid to ask, you get in there, you ask. If they say no, that's their right. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with people saying no. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Now, I know this is not fundraising related, but I serve as a chaplain in a hospital. It's a medical center in Livingston. And it happens sometimes when you're in the hospital that you'll walk in to visit a patient and they'll say, I'm not interested. I don't want you to come into my room.
Right.
And at first it hurts, like, oh my gosh, you're rejecting me? How could you reject me? Like, you don't even know me. I'm a nice guy. We'll have a nice conversation. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna bring God into your life, or whatever it is. But you realize that no, they have it's in their right to say, look, you know what? I'm not interested in having a rabbinic figure or a chaplain around. That's okay. So it's okay to be told to be rejected. You just have to realize that it's not you. It's how they're feeling, and you just go on to the next one.
We're having this Shabbos in North Windermere, Bez Hashem, Shabbos Zach. We're having Rabbi Pesach Krohn as our scholar in residence, one of my favorite speakers and one of the most popular speakers around the world today. And a number of years ago, I heard him speaking on the Upper West Side. He made the following comment. He was talking about it in a different context, like you're talking about in terms of chaplaincy. He said there's a formula for fundraising. It's called SW to the third over N. And we knew what he was talking about. So he said SW to the third power stands for some will, some won't, so what, next. And it's an important mantra in life that we have to recognize whatever we're doing, that, we do the best we can. We put in our effort. We go about it in an intelligent way with the 3 C's or with whatever our methodology is. And we have to recognize, what we're selling is not going to be for everybody. And we can't be discouraged when people, and we can't take it personally. I think that's such an important point, and something that maybe as young Rabbanim, we evolve from and we grow from, that not everything is about us. So we think everything is about us. And I do a lot of my own counseling with other people, and I find I spend a lot of time telling them, like, when people treat you a certain way and it makes you feel uncomfortable, you have to take a step back and recognize that, it's most often not about you. You end up being the receiver of their angst or their issues, but it's more often about them than it is about you, which is fascinating. So this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, as always. I'm going to kind of wrap up. Just very briefly, just tell us a little bit. I'm just curious. I like to ask this to people because you can always learn from it. Just tell us a little bit, like something about yourself that maybe people wouldn't know, like something about yourself, kind of a hobby you have, something kind of how you keep yourself fresh at what you're doing. I think many of us, whatever we're doing, we can get burned out. How do you kind of keep yourself? You seem very kind of energetic and spry, and here it is a decade and you still seem just as enthusiastic today as you were when you started. How do you do that? Kind of, what is it that keeps you channeled and focused and kind of balanced? What are those things that maybe, could be helpful to other people?
I try to do a lot of things, not to limit myself in one area. So, Shul, with regards to Shul, just always continuing to sharpen your vision and your focus of what you want. And it's like it's a living document, essentially. It changes of what you think the community needs, how you think the community can best grow. So you're always thinking, wherever you are, you're looking around and seeing different models and different ideas you're coming up with. So it just keeps you fresh because, again, I have the freedom to pivot and change, paradigm shifts, Stephen Covey's paradigm shifts, but whatever you want to do something a little different. So that's always helpful. I'm never boxed in here, which is great. The other piece is that, again, I do some chaplaincy work in a hospital, so I'm exposed to a whole other world there. And the other thing that I just started doing this past year is I'm coaching at the JEC basketball team. So
wow.
There's if you keep yourself busy and you're always engaged, you're always gonna, again, you're building relationships, whether you're building relationships with teenagers or their parents or people in the hospital or executives. There's always opportunities to cultivate and develop relationships, because that's, in my opinion, that's the key to so much in life, is developing positive relationships and developing those habits and sharpening your mission and your focus. So I think the busier that I am, the more energetic I become. Sometimes when I just sitting in my office, things start to get a little dull and boring. I just have to get out and do something to get those creative juices flowing. So the more that I'm around, the more that things, the energy, the blood starts flowing, and you get excited.
No, it's a great answer, and I think it's a great way to end this discussion. I couldn't agree with you more. I have a mentor of mine. He's a pretty cool guy. His name is Jesse Itzler. He owns the Atlanta Hawks basketball team, and he does a lot of self-help coaching, and I hope to get him on the show one of these days. And he always talks about kind of having life experiences, talks about, building a life resume and building more experiences. And I think relationships, as you're talking about, not only is it so essential and key to fundraising, to philanthropy, because people give to people that they like, and people give to people, and there are all these different principles in that regard. And there's so much legwork that has to be done to be an effective fundraiser in terms of getting to know people, building your base, broadening your base, deepening your connection with people. But putting aside fundraising for a second, that's life. I mean, the real beauty in life is through relationships, closeness to family, as I'll bring us back to earlier when you mentioned your wife said, wherever we move, we should move in your family. And to be around good people, and because we all gain from each other. Nobody has all the answers. Everybody has different approaches. Every one of us is different and unique. And through that, we're able to really grow and gain and get new perspectives, get fresh perspectives. Sometimes we have to get out of our own head, out of our own space, out of our own offices. We kind of have to model and look at how other people are doing things, not in a way to in any way be jealous of other people's success, but to be motivated by it, to see it, and to have what's called kina sofrim, tar b'chachma, as we're taught through our sources, that seeing how other people are doing things in certain ways that maybe are more effective adds to us and gives us new dimensions and new perspectives. Rabbi Shachter often used to say that you have to make a concept of shinoi kona in the Talmud, that you can sometimes acquire things through a shinoi, through doing things differently. It's a type of methodology when you find a lost item, that you can take somebody else's Torah, you can take somebody else's idea, and you're koning it for yourself with a shinoi, meaning you make a little bit of your own kind of, introduce your own nofech mishali, my own perspective on it, and that kind of, that can be a whole fresh new world. So Rabbi Hess, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us your time and your erudition here this morning, and I look forward to sharing this podcast with the world at large. I think many people are going to gain a great deal from it.
Thank you for listening to the show. If you have any feedback or comments, you can reach Rabbi Cohen at info@rabbidavidmcohen.com or on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. If you have any suggestions for participants in the program or are interested in sponsorship opportunities, contact us as well.